Each of these rulers of Asian nomads in their time was considered and was a great leader and commander. But if the Mongols were a purely Asian and Eastern European bogeyman, the Huns fought their way across the whole of Eurasia and became a real scourge of God for the countries of the West. The memory of them has survived to this day, although more than 1.5 millennia have passed since their disappearance. And what would have happened if they had fought each other? I believe the Mongols would have won without much trouble, and I'm ready to explain why. Think of them as Huns with 800 years of experience, better weapons, advanced tactics, and new military technologies. No amount of Hunnic ferocity, as so often mentioned by Roman authors, would have helped them overcome the distance of 8 centuries. Besides, the average nomad of Genghis Khan's era lived under exactly the same conditions and experienced the same social upheavals that made Mongol society just as warlike and expansive. Both the Huns and the Mongols never went to war without good company. Let us assume that they converged for battle on a great wide plain, that their armies are equal in number, let it be 50,000 men, that all the combatants have roughly comparable experience, that they possess the typical weapons of their era. The Huns team, led by the playing coach Attila, consists of 20,000 light cavalry, which includes both the Huns proper and other nomads close to them, Akatsirs, Bulgars, and other guys who learn to ride a horse before they learn to walk. They prefer long-range combat, have composite bows for this purpose, but a significant number of riders carry darts. For close combat, they have straight swords. Sabers had not yet been invented at that time. They either have no armor at all, or it is light leather and elements of Roman equipment, most often only a helmet or helmet and chainmail. Allied with them are 5,000 heavy Germanic cavalry aimed at close combat. Their horses can develop high speed but retain it for a very short time, and are generally less durable. The Germans are better protected, as sedentary peoples have greater production capabilities, armed with swords and short spears. The Mongols would sneeringly call them medium cavalry, since they know what heavy cavalry should look like. 25,000 infantry, made up of various Germanic tribes, protected only by large shields. Although the retinues of nobles may have ringlets, not everyone has swords, and they are not the main type of weapon. Light spears are used, which are suitable for both striking and throwing. Some may have throwing axes. The number of foot archers is small. On the other side is Genghis Khan as the head coach, but he only commands and does not directly participate in battles. This gives a certain advantage. The commander can monitor changes in the course of the battle and react accordingly. For direct action, he has a cohort of talented generals, each of whom has conquered more than Attila the Hun. The Khan leads 40,000 Mongol and Turkic mounted riflemen into the field. For closer fire, they can rush in and use heavy Chinese infantry bows, but in this case it's not necessary. For close combat, they have the saber, which is much better suited for mounted attack and was not known in the time of the Huns. Most importantly, however, there are stirrups, which give an advantage to both mounted riflemen and even more so to shock cavalry. All have the light cotton armor of Hatangu Dagal, which can be something like the European quilt, or can include metal plates, mirrors, shoulder pads, and other protection. Hus Huyag is leather armor, Ilchir Bilig Huyag is chainmail. In general, the degree of spread of protective equipment is much higher than that of the Huns. The heavy cavalry of 5,000 uses all kinds of laminars and lamellars of Mongolian, Chinese, and Iranian origin. They ride the best horses the nomadic and sedentary world can provide. These guys also have bows, but they attack more often with spears, and use the palash and mace as backup weapons. The remaining 5,000 is accounted for by all sorts of military engineers, a staff of throwing guns, servants who deal with replacement horses, and all sorts of spongers and lackeys. The latter do not participate in the battle, but they also have their own functions. So the battle begins with an attack by Mongolian mounted archers, perhaps reinforced by the firing of war machines. The archers at Genghis Khan's disposal are much more numerous, their composite bows are more perfect, so Attila has little to answer with, especially since some of his cavalry, preferring darts, will not even have time to approach the necessary distance. So after a while the Huns will be dispersed, sooner rather than later. The Mongols will kill the remaining ones in close combat. They are better protected. They have sabers and stirrups. Foot archers will not play a role. In the armies of the era of the Great Migration of Peoples, they were few, and their weapons less effective. The Hun Kagan will have to use Germanic allies, but they will be outflanked and shanked with arrows. It will end with a battle of heavy cavalry, which the Mongols also have better in any component, from weapons to protective equipment. The light horsemen will help surround the Germans, and hardly anyone will get away. Thus, I foresee a relatively easy victory for the Mongols. Many will say that the Hun army could have been made up of cavalrymen alone. A legitimate point, but it's unlikely to make a difference. Also, it is possible to speculate who was the best leader, Genghis Khan or Attila. Attila inherited power over the barbarian half of Europe from his father and brother. He already had a large army and the status of supreme ruler, while Genghis Khan came literally out of nowhere and had to gradually acquire allies and subjects through diplomacy and conquest. Attila defeated the Byzantine army but could not take Constantinople. He took tribute from the Western Romans but lost to them and their Germanic allies a key battle in the Catalonian fields in Gaul. His plundering raid into half-destroyed Italy failed. Genghis Khan united Mongolia, overthrew the Chinese Jin dynasty and took its lands, subdued the Tanguts, and conquered the main superpower of the time, the Central Asian state of Khwarezmshahs. Led at the very beginning of his journey, he lost several battles in the steppe, but once the Mongols became united, he was unstoppable. Even after his declaration as a great Khan, his commanders sometimes suffered defeats, but Genghis Khan never lost big, whereas Attila was defeated repeatedly. It can be compared to Napoleon, who was considered the great commander, but has conceded in key battles at Leipzig and Waterloo. Further, it is necessary to speak about political heritage and the approach to management of territories. Attila basically acted as the head of a coalition of barbarian nations, destroying cities for tribute, but he never really controlled his own allies or those he defeated. Moreover, the Huns' power fell soon after Attila's death. The Germans fell out of submission and began building their own kingdoms, while the Slavs began seizing territories in Central Europe. The horde lost 2 significant battles and was forced to retreat from the Roman borders. After Attila's death on the marriage bed against the Huns, their barbarian allies rebelled. The nomads were defeated, and for the next centuries, Europe was ruled by Germanic tribes. Genghis Khan saw the purpose of his wars differently. He made himself and his family the sole ruler of the conquered peoples, and destroyed cities only to force their neighbors to surrender. He preferred the spoils of plunder to the steady tribute that came in the form of taxes. Even after his death, the Mongol Empire continued to expand. It turns out that Genghis Khan was a better leader